Chuck Strozier, it is such a privilege to be talking with you. And I know we're going to have a conversation that'll be part of our YouTube channel that tries to share some of our thinking from the think tank on resolution of intractable conflict. But this is a rare opportunity to get to know you a bit as an individual with a special interest in resolution of intractable conflict and a very interesting array of skills and personal past history. So I don't know where you want to begin, but I would like others to know that you are a psychoanalyst, a historian, somebody who's written a couple books about Kohut, is writing about Ireland that may be done. And before we were having a conversation about how you were in your earlier days an actual activist, social activist, and you have some concerns about what's going on now today. So let's hear it. That's enough of an introduction for you, maybe.
I think we could probably stop there.
No, I that's only the beginning.
No, it's been really a pleasure and an honor to be part of the think tank, and I think it's to your great credit that it was not only created, but that it's lasted as long and has been as vibrant as it has.
Mhm.
I come at it sort of indirectly because I began my academic life as an historian. I got a PhD in history from the University of Chicago, and I was always interested in psychoanalysis, but from a research point of view, really as a psychohistorian. And I, after I got my PhD, I started teaching, actually hired as a psychohistorian. And then while teaching, I did my training, my didactic analysis, and I worked in Chicago at the Chicago Institute for Psychoanalysis, and worked with Kohut, got to know Kohut and worked with him and did a book with him. And I delayed, however, seeing patients. I thought I could teach and write books, but I couldn't also fit in seeing patients until significantly later. I was 48 years old before I started my practice, but I found I was wrong. I mean, I love practice and doing psychotherapy, psychoanalysis, and so. But I do feel, and have always felt, this deep commitment to social change and the kind of ideals that we pursue in the think tank. And that, you know, much of my work has been my early work on Abraham Lincoln. I've read 2 books on Abraham Lincoln, was purely historical and psychohistorical, as was my book on Kohut. But I've done other books. I've been very concerned with fundamentalism. In the early 1990s, I spent 5 years going to fundamentalist churches, doing field work in fundamentalist churches and interviewing. And after 9/11, that led to one book. And after 9/11, I interviewed survivors and witnesses, and that led to a book, sort of trying to understand people's experience with these huge historical forces and events and violence and suffering from them. And that has led, you mentioned my work on Northern Ireland, that has led to my what's turned out to be a 10-year project on the peace process in Northern Ireland that is now finished and in the process of, I'm in the process of finding a publisher. So, and that, of course, that story is remarkably hopeful, particularly as we look around the world at, the Middle East and Israel and the intractable problems there, as well as in Eastern Europe, where there's outright war in both places. In Northern Ireland, the story, 30 years of bloodshed and troubles and killing each other and shooting police in the back of the head. And by God, somehow they found a way to sit down at the table together and scream and yell at each other and hurl insults. And gradually it began to take shape, and they found peace and justice and created new institutions of democracy, that our colleague John Alderdice played an important role in making that happen. But there's no immediate lesson to be drawn from Northern Ireland, except the most general of lessons, that if the Irish can do it, anyone can do it. That it can happen, that intractable conflict doesn't have to remain grim and pessimistic, grim and hopeless. My own personal experience has made me reflect, and with some anxiety, about the current state of dissent on American university campuses these days. Because I was a graduate student I was in college in the mid-60s and graduate student in the late 60s and at the University of Chicago. And, we were fighting, America was fighting an immoral and corrupt war. And there was a lot of dissent about the injustices of the relationship of the university to the world. And I was a graduate student. I was one of the leaders that took over the administration building in 1968, and in early 1969, I'm sorry, but in 68, I was also in Chicago. I was in front of during the convention, was in front of the Hilton Hotel when the police charged up Balboa Street and attacked the young people, and there was a line of National Guard in front of us, and I was putting flowers in the rifles. This was my formative experience
A real moment.
with dissent. Yeah, and it's worrisome that now dissent takes the form often of sort of on the fringes of violence. Setting up tents and hurling anti-Semitic insults, and at the same time is being squashed by university administrators and immediately cleaning out encampments, and arresting students in ways that create a very unhealthy and I think unfortunate atmosphere, because if students and faculty can't speak and raise questions about ongoing activities and policies and wars and support for wars that our governments engage in, then that kind of dissent is not going to be anywhere else in the society.
Such an important point. Chuck, one of the central questions in the think tank and for psychoanalysts generally is, how can psychoanalysts make a difference in resolution of conflict? You've certainly documented in your books and reasoned out in your books understandings of conflict. Is that your main intervention? In other words, what are your thoughts about how psychoanalysts can make a difference in our troubled world?
I think in our practice, we deal with honesty and authenticity. That's really the quest of psychotherapy and psychoanalysis. And I think that readily translates into a concern for honesty and authenticity in the world of politics and dealing with violence and conflict that seems intractable and hopeless. Um, and I think there is a direct connection. I mean, I think our struggles with individual patients sensitizes us and makes us alert to the same kind or analogous, they're not the same, but analogous issues in the historical and social and political realm. And I think we have we're obviously a small group relatively, but I think our experience carries over to potentially um, give us the potential to bring a kind of wisdom to dealing with issues in the world.
Have you discovered a way to encourage the other side to listen or be curious when you're confronted with fundamentalism or polarization?
Yeah, you know, when I was working, I spent 5 years going to church. I
Right.
cut my hair and put on a tie
My goodness.
and yeah, and I went to 3 hour services on Sunday and Bible reading classes on Tuesday and you know and prayer meetings on Saturday. And so I was in the field and I was impressed with and people who read my book all comment on this that you know they're human beings, they have struggles, some become doctrinaire, some become difficult, but they yearn for renewal and redemption in their own lives. And I tried to capture that in my interviews. My line is they're good people with a bad theory, and it is a bad theory, and it can be toxic in many situations, but they're good people. And I think we need to, you know, in a atmosphere of partisanship and hatred and division, we need to recognize that that good people sometimes adopt bad ideas and bad theories and hurtful theories, but that you can always connect with people in at the human level. Incidentally, I think that's something that we find in psychoanalysis. It's there are very few people in a lifetime of clinical work. There are very few people whom you end up not actually liking when you really understand them, you know, and understand where they've come from and whom you can connect with, even if you sometimes don't like them. Um, you can recognize and do recognize their humanity. That's what happened in Northern Ireland. They 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 were for 30 years they were killing each other, the Catholics and the Protestants. And granted, there were the extreme violent wings of those groups, but they came they came to feel that the violence was it reached a kind of dead end for everybody, but they were willing and could well have continued the violence for another 100 years. But somehow, and the story is wonderfully complicated, they they came together and developed a kind of respect for each other, uh, and an empathy. I call it a radical empathy in my book that is that is very much the stuff of psychoanalysis. You know, empathy is at the heart. The development of empathy, the workings of empathy, is very much at the heart of the psychoanalytic project. and also was at the center of the peacemaking process, the psychology of the peacemaking process in Northern Ireland.
Chuck, thank you so much. This is kind of a brief moment with you in which it's very encouraging to me, and I'm sure others who are listening, that your emphasis on authenticity, on empathy, and on good people who might have a bad theory is, I think, encouraging and will keep us lively in ourselves and perhaps a little less fearful when we're confronted with people who may perceive us as the enemy, and we want to get to know them as a fellow human being. I just really want to thank you for talking with me and for joining us on this YouTube channel and for being in the think tank. I look forward to seeing you there next time.
Thank you for inviting me originally.